We continue now at the top of Daf Zayin Amud Aleph in Meseches Nedarim. This is Nedarim Daf 87a. On the previous Amud, the Mishnah said, let's say a man annuls a vow. He thought the vow was the vow of his daughter. It turns out to be his wife, or vice versa. So then the annulment of that vow is not going to be effective. And the Gemara asked, does that mean to say that when the pasuk says Yoni Osa, that it means he has to annul the vow for her? We mean to take that pasuk literally, and he has to know exactly whose vow he is annulling. But the Gemara asks, V'hagabe karoim, but when it comes to tearing kriya, this is talking about tearing kriya in avelos, in mourning. Dechsiv al, the pasuk says the word al twice in that pasuk. Dechsiv, like the pasuk says, al Shaul, Val Yehonasan beno, he was mourning over Shaul, and he was mourning over Yonasan, the son of Shaul. V'tanyan, we learned in a brisa, Amru lo meisaviv, let's say they tell a person that his father died, v'kara, and he tears kriya. Then it turns out that it was actually his son who died. So he yotzi yadei kriya. So he fulfills the obligation of kriya in that situation. And the Gemara understands this to be a contradiction, because over here we're saying that when it says al Shaul val Yehonasan beno, even if you don't know exactly who you're tearing kriya for, the kriya is going to be considered to be a good kriya. You will have fulfilled the obligation. And when it comes to the annulment of the vow, we're taking the pasuk literally, and we're saying the person has to know exactly whose vow he is annulling. The Mefarish over here says, "V'hagabe karoim dechsiv al demashma she'im mesu lo shnayim krovim." So first, the Mefarish explains that the pasuk is mashma. Let's say a person has two relatives who die, or shlosha, or three relatives. Shechayev likro al kol echad b'fnei atzmo. So the first thing we learn from the pasuk is the person needs to tear kriya for each individual person that died. That's what we learn out from al Shaul val Yonasan beno v'alam Hashem dahainu prat. It means to specify there has to be a separate kriya for Shaul, a separate kriya for Yehonasan, etc. Betanyan, we learned in a brisa, meisaviv v'karav yachar nimtza shu beno. Brisa says, let's say his father died. He tore kriya for his father, but then it turned out it was really his son. Shemes, his son was really the one that died. V'lo aviv, not his father. So yotzi yadei kriya, so he fulfills the obligation of kriya. The al lav dafka. It sounds like we're saying that al is lav dafka. You don't have to know exactly who you're tearing kriya for. Hachanami, osa lav dafka, the same thing with the pasuk of osa. We should say that's also lav dafka. You don't need to know who you're annulling the vow for. And the Gemara answers, Amri, the answer as follows, Lo kash, it's not difficult. Habistam v'habimafarish. It depends if you're talking about a stam situation, or it depends if what you're doing is explicit. And the Mefarish explains, kan bistam, kan b'mefarish. In one case we're talking where you do it stam, in one case where it's explicit. Gabe kriya shakara stam. By kriya, and when the Bryce is talking about the fact that he tore kriya, so it's talking about where the person just tore kriya. Shalo alav v'lo al beno. He wasn't having anyone in mind. He didn't have his father in mind. He didn't have his son in mind. Nothing. And that's why over there it was effective. When he later found out who it was, we say that it works. Avol b'masnisin, but in the Mishnah where we say it's not effective by the annulment, so there kagon shefer beferish l'shem bito. He explicitly said he's annulling for his daughter. Ve'ilkach, and therefore kevan the nimsa she'enokach tzarach lohafer l'shem mishto shenadra. Once he finds out that this is not the case, that it is not his daughter, so he's got to do it again for the sake of his wife. And the Gemara continues, Vatanya, we learned in a brisa like this as well. Amru lo meisaviv, let's say they tell him his father died, v'kara v'yacharkach nimtza beno, and he tears kriya, then he finds out it's really his son, lo yotzi yadei kriya. He does not fulfill the obligation of kriya. Amru lo meis uchesavor avivhu. Let's say they tell him someone died, he thinks it's his father. V'kara v'yachrach nimtza beno, and he tears kriya, then he finds out it's his son, yotzi yadei kriya. In that case, he does fulfill the obligation of kriya. That's exactly what the Gemara is saying. That second case of that brisa is talking about a case of stam. They just told him someone died, he didn't know exactly who it was, so there he would fulfill the obligation. And the Gemara continues, Ravashi says a different answer. Kan besoch kedei dibur, kan la'achar kedei dibur. In one case, we're talking about where it happens betoch kedei dibur, that the person finds out that it was a different individual. So he immediately finds out that what he did should have been for somebody else. So there already it's going to be effective. But let's say he finds out subsequently, la'achar kedei dibur, after the amount of time. Kedei dibur means the amount of time to say Shalom Aleichem Rebbe. So after that small amount of time, then he finds out. So then already that's too late, and the the person has to do it again in order to fulfill the obligation. And the Gemara elaborates, when we say that the person fulfills the obligation of kriya, meaning he finds out that it was his son within a very short amount of time from the time he did the kriya. And when we say that he does not fulfill the obligation of kriya, that's la'achar kedei dibur. That is, if he finds out after that amount of time, then he finds out who it was, so then he will not fulfill his obligation. And the Gemara continues, V'atanya, we have a brisa that supports this distinction between toch kedei dibur and liachar kedei dibur. The brisa says, Mishi yesh lo chola besoch beiso v'nes aleph. Let's say there's a sick person inside another individual's house, and that sick person, he faints. V'chemeduma shemeis, and the person in the house thinks that this person who fainted actually died. V'kara, so he tears kriya for him. V'achar kach meis, and then the person actually dies, so meaning the kriya was done before the actual death. So lo yatsi yedei kriya, so he has not fulfilled the obligation of kriya. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi mishum bar kapara. Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi says that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says in the name of bar kapara, lo shanu ela shemeis la'achar kedei dibur. This halacha that he has not fulfilled the obligation of kriya is only true if the individual dies la'achar kedei dibur. There's a bit of a delay. Aval besoch kedei dibur, but if he dies besoch kedei dibur, it's very quickly after he tore kriya, then the person actually died. Kedibur dami, that's like the same moment, and then he would fulfill the obligation of the kriya. And the Gemara says, V'hilchasan, the halacha is toch kedei dibur kedibur dami. If something happens toch kedei dibur, let's say a person corrects what he said, toch kedei dibur, so then kedibur dami, that is going to be good. In the case of where you have an obligation to say something, the person will have fulfilled the obligation, toch kedei dibur kedibur dami. Chutz, with the following exceptions where we do not say toch kedei dibur kedibur dami. The exceptions are as follows: mi megadif, somebody who blasphemes; v'oved avodas kochavim, or somebody who serves idols; umekadesh, or somebody who's mekadesh a woman, to betroth a woman, or megarish, and somebody who divorces a woman. And the Mefarish explains, V'hilchas toch kedei dibur dahachozer toch kedei dibur kedibur dami. The point is, if somebody retracts something within that short amount of time, that's going to be effective l'kulam mili, for everything, except for the following: Chutz mi megadif mevareches Hashem. It's except for somebody, let's say, who curses Hashem, then he takes it back. That's not going to work. V'yoved avodas kochavim. Let's say somebody serves an idol. Ha'omer la'avodas kochavim eliata da'adibur l'chudei chayiv. Let's say a person says to an idol, "You are my God." So the speech itself that creates the chiyuv, you can't retract that. V'hamekadesh isha. Let's say somebody is mekadesh a woman. V'hamegarsher, somebody divorces a woman, tries to take it back. Afal pi shechozer b'soch kedei dibur ein a chazar. Even if the person retracts b'toch kedei dibur, that's not going to be an effective retraction. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah. Amra konim te'inim v'anovim elu shani toemes. Let's say she says that I'm taking a neder not to have figs and grapes. So kayim l'te'enim, if the husband upholds the vow with regards to the figs, so kulo kayim, the entire vow is considered upheld. Hafer l'te'enim, now let's say the husband annuls the vow with regards to the figs, so eino mufer, it's not annulled, at sheyofer afla novim, until he also annuls the portion of the vow that had to do with the grapes. Amra konem te'ena shani to'emes va'anova shani to'emes. Let's say the way she phrases it is, she says a konem not to taste the fig and not to taste the grape. She phrases it, or she separates it out into two separate phrases. Hare elu shnei nedarim. That's going to be considered two separate nedarim. And the Ran explains, Amra konim te'enim va'anovim elu shani to'emes kayim l'te'enim kulo kayim. Again, that's the case where she says it all in one phrase. So if he upholds for the figs, then the entire vow is upheld. Afilu la'anovim, even with regards to the grapes, that is upheld. Ve'eno yachol achzer l'hafer. At that point in time, once he upholds the vow, he can't go back and annul the vow. But if he annuls, so eno mufarat sheyofer afla novim. It's not going to be annulled until he also annuls the part with the grapes. Meaning to say, according to the Ran, eno mufer la'anovim at sheyofer lahem beferish. The Ran understands the portion of the vow that has to do with the grapes, that's not annulled. He has to annul that specifically. Avol te'enim shehafer mufer. But the figs which he annulled, that portion of the annulment, that actually is effective. And the Ran has another explanation, Lashon Acher, another version, eno mufer klal. The Mishnah means to say it's not mufer at all, the entire neder. Afilu l'te'enim, even by the figs, the grapes and the figs, the annulment doesn't work at all. Shelo kol heimenu l'hafer miksasu. According to that understanding of the Mishnah, the husband is not able to annul just a portion of the vow. Now, Amra konim te'eno shani to'emes va'anova shani to'emes hare elu shnei nedarim. The Mishnah then said, if she says it as two separate phrases, a konim not to eat fig, a konim not to taste grapes, so then that's two separate nedarim. And the Ran points out, lav lemeimra sheyitzar chafar l'chol echad v'yachad b'fnei atzmo. The Mishnah does not mean to say that he has to annul each one individually, because the hashnei nedarim hafar achas len, even if you have two separate nedarim, you can do one annulment. Uchidetanya b'tosefta, that's what it says in the Tosefta, hayu aleh chamisha nedarim hafar achas lakulan. Person she has 5 nedarim on her, you can do one annulment for all of them. Ela lomer, but what the Mishnah just means to say is, she'im hafer okayim echad mehem, if he annulled, or if he upheld one of those two vows, yachol okayim ol hafer sasheni, he's still able to uphold the second one, or to annul the second one. They're considered distinct, independent vows. And the Gemara says, Moni Masnisin, who is the author of our Mishnah? Rabbi Yishmael. The author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yishmael. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Isha Yekimenu v'Isha Yefeirenu. It says that her husband, he's the one that upholds the vow, and he is the one that is able to annul the vow. And the Brisa explains, Amra konem te'enim va'anavim elu shani toemes. Let's say she says a konem, and again she's putting them together, the figs and the grapes, I'm not going to taste. So kayim l'te'enim, so if he upholds the vow in terms of the figs, kulo kayim. So it's as if the entire thing is upheld, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Zayin Amud Beis.